February 12, 2021 marks the demise of one of the most prominent sociologists, Professor Partha Nath Mukherjee. We all have gathered today via the digital platform to pay our heartfelt homage to one of the colossal figure in the field of sociology and polity. With Professor Partha Mukherjee's sad demise, the academia in general and Policy Perspectives Foundation in particular has lost an academic giant. The sheer breadth of his scholarship cut across the vast fields of social, political, as well as the research domain. Personally speaking, I, Manika Malhotra, researcher PPF, feel extremely fortunate to have had this opportunity to work under his guidance while he was writing one of his last papers. Today, I also recall his informal techniques with which he used to motivate us to delve deeper in pursuit of seeking knowledge and expressing our views. His last exposition, Rumination, in which he talked on differentiation, integration and exclusion, dynamics and challenges to nation building, reflected on his commitment to rethink the political sphere in order to explore the principles of modern nation state and the inclusive principles on which the idea of modern India should be placed. We, the researchers at PPF, remember Professor Mukherjee as an inspiring intellectual who motivated and appreciated us to think outside of the box and encouraged us to never settle for anything less than excellence. In my own engagement with his work, he allowed me to participate in the intellectual exploration, not only professionally, but we also developed a very special personal connect with him, as he always kept inquiring about our health and well being in a grandfatherly manner. He was an excellent mentor whom I will never forget. He has been a deep source of support, motivation, and sustenance to generations of scholars and researchers looking for answers beyond the conventional. He was truly one of his kind, and I still believe he had a lot to offer and left us too soon. Professor Mukherjee has left an indelible mark on PPF, and I'm sure on all of us. His numerous works will certainly continue to resonate scholars and researchers alike. Respected Mukherjee sir, you will be fondly remembered. I would now take few minutes to read brief bio of respected Professor Parthanath Mukherjee. Professor Parthanath Mukherjee was born in Gaya on 3rd September 1940 and was groomed largely in Patna. Professor Mukherjee's father, the late Mr. Narendranath Mukherjee, a successful business person, was friends with nationalist leaders such as Jai Prakash Narayan and Avdeshwar Prasad Sinha and had helped their cause. Dr. Rajendra Prasad and Mr. Sri Krishna Sinha were known to the parents. Professor Mukherjee's mother, the late Srimati Bijoy Mukherjee, a homemaker with involvement in many social activities, was a strong influence in his life. She was keen that her sons should pursue higher education with an academic bent. The family was steeped in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition that strove to uphold the Catholicity of all religions and the transcendence of the spiritual as a goal in life. Young Parthanath was deeply concerned about the nation building project. This inspiration drew him close to Jai Prakash Narayan, who may have inspired him to pursue sociology as a discipline. As a generation that had transitioned from colonial rule, he was driven to contribute towards its uplift. After topping his MA class in Patna, Mr. Parthanath went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for a PhD in sociology on a generously funded scholarship in the mid-1960s. This would be a short interlude for two reasons. First, he found himself in midst of a racist attack. Second, and more importantly, the Vice Chancellor of Patna University offered him a lecturership in the university department on the basis of his MA result. It was during this period that Professor Mukherjee completed his doctoral work in Patna, which led to two papers in the leading global recognized journal, Human Organization. It is important to note that he did his PhD from Patna University working on Bhudan and Gramdan, two social movements that sought to empower landless peasants. Even though the PhD was granted by Patna University under the supervision of Professor Narmadeshwar Prasad, Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee at the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata had played a significant mentoring role. He respected both his mentors and affectionately called Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee his Master Moshe. This is the Bangla Adosh for a teacher, which has no nuanced English translation. This spectacular and grounded research in India propelled, propelled Professor Mukherjee to the Delhi School of Economics 1970 to 1972 and later to the Jawaharlal Nehru University years 1973 to 1979.
So we are gathered today to pay homage to Professor Partha Mukherjee, Parthoda as he was affectionately known to all his friends. And while we mourn his untimely demise, we also celebrate a life which was uh, full of accomplishments, full of achievements and high positions that he held. And I'd like to briefly go over what we shared with each other because Manika has already told you about his earlier career. Uh, we met in the early 70s when he joined JNU, the Center for Study of Social Systems, and I joined around the same time the Center for Political Studies in the same building. And those were exciting days, the foundation of JNU, the building of a new institution. And so there was a sense of a spirit of adventure and excitement in doing something that we were conscious was going to be uh, determining in the history of the institution that is JNU. So his entry into JNU came after his short stint in the Delhi School of Economics, and then he went on to, he worked there with Professor Raj Krishna. The work that he did in the Center for Social Systems was concerned with social movements such as the Maoist movement in Naxalbari, and they also the questions relating to the migration of the birth of Bangladesh when refugees poured into India, and he wrote on that too as we celebrate 50 years of the birth of Bangladesh. Parthoda assumed the Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee position in the Indian Statistical Institute when his dear Master Moshe, as he was called, retired. And he remained in that position for a longish period from 1980 to 1996. He moved from Calcutta to the Delhi Center in 1984, and this was a period when he persisted with his work on social movements, reflecting deeply on India's project as a nation. I think that those reflections still remain very valuable insights as even today the national project, the project of building a nation, is confused by some with partisan projects. So I think here we can look back at what he was trying to tell us in those seminal works. This prepared the stint at the ISI, prepared the next stage of his long academic career when he joined the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai as its director, which was now the TIS University. So he was in effect the vice chancellor of that university. He tried to impart social science content and meaning to the excellent teaching and research that was already going on in TIS and devoted much of his attention to the role of indigeneity in the social sciences, drawing on uh, local or rather national, because it was not restricted to any particular region or province, roots to understand the contemporary. I think that was one of the signal messages that Partha wanted to convey through his teaching and research. And we ran into each other again because obviously he had moved uh, institutions. He was no longer with JNU for many years, whereas I continued. And when I retired from JNU as rector and pro vice chancellor in 2010, I joined the Institute of Social Sciences, where he was holding the SK chair in in social sciences. And it was then in the last 10 years, though he didn't come very often to the institute um, after he um, relinquished the SK Day chair, but he continued to work, and whenever he dropped in, as it happened, it was my privilege to occupy the same office that he had been assigned. Uh, this was the period when he received many honors, and I'd like to mention those. The sociology profession recognized him in a number of ways. He was elected secretary of the Indian Sociological Society in 87, 88, and thereafter its president in 2004, 2005. In 2013, Partha was conferred the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Indian Sociological Society. He had a very close association with the University of Lund in Sweden and directed the Council for Social Development for a couple of years. He also served in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library as a senior fellow, and that is when he came to the institute and held the SK Day chair from 2003 to 2009, where he was designated emeritus professor. He was a member of the governing body of the Policy Perspectives Foundation, as Mr. Haldar has mentioned, and he was involved in guiding and pursuing research at the PPF. And most recently, he had co-edited with Professors Jayaram and Bholanath Ghosh uh, essays in honor of Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee, his guru, which was published by Springer in 2019. So here was a remarkable academic integrity that showed the way forward by example, and it's a privilege to be to gather here today with his former colleagues, his friends, his students, to pay tribute to him. And of course, we are joined by his brother, Professor Indranath Mukherjee, and of course, his son, Rahul Mukherjee, currently at Heidelberg. So I think with those brief words of introduction, we can move on to hear some of the uh, testimonies and memories of those who knew him throughout his career. Thank you.
I have known Professor Partha Mukherjee for half a century. He did his PhD from Patna University on the Bhudan Gramdan movement, and a few articles, papers have been published on that basis in the famous Journal of Applied Anthropology, Human Organization, published from the United States. But without knowing each other, I also was doing my work for PhD on Bhudan Gramdan movement with special reference to Rajasthan. He joined JNU in 1972 in the Center for the Study of Social System, where I was already there for an year. At JNU, the faculty, four of us, floated an idea of coming out with a book on social movement, each one studying a particular movement. I started studying the agrarian movement in Kerala, whereas he was studying the Naxalite movement in West Bengal. In the year 1976, the theme selected by the Indian Sociological Society was social movements. And both of us were invited to write what are called working papers. And these were published in Sociological Bulletin, the official organ of the Indian Sociological Society. The Indian Sociological Society has invited the International Sociological Association to organize, to come or allow the ISS, Indian Sociological Society, to organize the World Congress of Sociology. It was in 1986. And Professor Mukherjee was its treasurer, a very difficult job. And since it involved handling finance, among other things, he has edited two books. One when Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee was alive, primarily on methodological issues, and another book after Professor Mukherjee passed away, more recently, about his overall contribution to South Asia. For all these reasons, I have very close intimacy with him. And not only personal, he was my next door neighbor in JNU. I was in house number 25, he in 26. People say that you can't choose your neighbors, that's correct. But we have been thrown together by fate. And I am particularly grieved because he was one colleague in sociology who was very close to me, ideologically, professionally, and personally. And therefore, I consider his untimely departure. Incidentally, he was younger to me by a few years. And therefore, while I'm happy that we are paying tributes to him, I'm very unhappy that fate has taken him away rather prematurely. Let me wish all the best for his sons, my next door neighbors, and give them enough strength and moral courage to face this catastrophe and go on working in their respective fields. Thank you very much.
No one is prepared for something like this. I think no one is ever prepared for death. And secondly, I think I agree with all of you that Partha's death was untimely. I had a very interesting relationship with Partha, and over the years, I have often returned to reflect about what kind of relationship I had with him. I cannot say that I collaborated with him very much academically. I went to meet Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee in what was then the lower campus, and Partha was with him at the time. We had a long conversation. Gradually, I got to know Partha extremely well, personally. but there was also an intellectual side to it. I got to realize that uh, it was actually the differences between him and me, which I found very productive because at that time I actually thought in a far more Marxist way. My Marxism had never been very conventional, but still I had a sort of hard Marxist position on many things. And he was a Gandhian, but and also very dedicated, extremely self-reflective Gandhian. He also taught me something else, which was very interesting, that when we say that we want to write academically about social movement, we are very thoughtless about our own relationship with the movement. The necessary difference between the way in which ordinary people think and the way we are actually tasked by our um, our academic role to think about it. And bringing these two different orders of thinking together to understand each other is not a very easy task, and we do not think about it very often. I was never a Gandhian. I now teach a course called Gandhian as Interlocutors, in which I'm very respectful to Gandhi. I can't say that I agree with Gandhi on everything, but I find in Gandhi something which I also found in Partha. His commitment to social movements, to ordinary people, etc. Those were equally morally dignified in a certain sense, compared to a very different orientation that I had from a much more left perspective towards social movements, ordinary people. I benefited from two people who were both non-Marxists, very critical of Marxism in many ways, and who did not hide their differences from Marxists and my own arguments, which were often Marxist. One was Partha, and the other person from whom I also learned a very, very great deal when I was in JNU, that was Satish Sabharwal. Both lost to us now. It's very important in that case if you see a way of thinking which is different from your own, but you do not either intellectually or morally want to dismiss. That actually makes you question and question your own thinking. And I'm deeply indebted to Partha for that. And there were two other things in which Partha was different from my kind of work. He was very deeply invested in fieldwork, and I always found interaction with him very instructive and very productive because of that. The way I got to know Partha very well, this is why I wouldn't call him Professor Muherji, I'll call him Partha. Was essentially as I got to know him this way, my initial curiosity about him was intellectual, not academic, but intellectual. It's something which transcended our much narrower and I think more lower level activity that we call intellectually in the academic part. Um, I got to know him personally very well. I got to know his family. I got to know Professor Indranath Mukherjee also quite well, his brother. And I got to know his children, Rahul and his brother, very, very well. And I've seen Rahul sort of growing up, gradually turning into a political scientist eventually. So I'm more in touch with Rahul now. I was not very much in touch with Partha after I came away from India, but I always value him, and I value him very, very deeply as an interlocutor who taught me an enormous amount by thinking in a way which was very profoundly different from mine. Thank you.
This feeling haunts me that I could not pay my tribute to him before he breathed his last. His end came so soon that I could not see him before he breathed his last. I could not also be present at the time of cremation just because some communication gap. But I would like to make a couple of observations about him. And here, as a scholar, I noticed he too attributes, very remarkable attributes of Partha Mukherjee. One, as Professor Uman and Professor Kabiraj have said, that he is not really an armchair scorer. scholar who postulates something without having the field experience. Whatever, he would always like to go to the field. And there's one attribute which impressed me most, because I am an economist and a quantitative economist. I deal with data, and his methodology is different. He would go to the field, collect data, relevant data, meet the concerned people, and try to understand, go deeper into the things. The second attribute which impressed me was, anything he will take, he will not discriminate between small and big. Whatever assignment he takes up, he will take it, he go into details, and he wants to be perfectionist. But what I felt that, because he was perfectionist, he did not bring all these things together, I thought. But there could be also another reason. Whenever there is a movement, he would like to go to the field, meet the actors there, understand, go deeper into it. All these things and insights, understanding must have gone into many of his writings, but he didn't. It is a pity that he did not bring all his insights, all the data that he collected laboriously in the form of one book. That is really, I miss it. I thought I would be able to go through it, and I kept on saying, then why don't bring it? Nation building was very close to his heart, and it so happened that it was his also last, perhaps I believe it was his last talk. I complete here because I know I have overtaken. I would like to pay my last tribute to him. There are many social interactions we had. We lead it together. This is not the forum or time. There's no time to share all those experiences. But these are the memories which to share, and all these memories will.
I don't know, I am becoming very emotional at this stage. As you said, he was our colleague for years. And in the demise of Partha, I lost my Guruji, with whom I had been since mid-1970s when I joined Jawaharlal Nehru University. It is a moment of sorrow and pain that makes me to think that Partha is no more. The relation started 47 years ago, and that continued till his death, the last moment. After I left the JNU, we started the Institute of Social Sciences. And at that time, Partha, along with Professor Rumman, was closely associated with the Institute because the Sociological Society and its association came to the Institute of Social Sciences. And for 29 years, the Indian Sociological Society was functioning from the Institute of Social Sciences. And of course, Professor T.K. Umman, and along with him, the main person who did and continued to support the functioning was Partha. We had in the Institute a chair sponsored by the Ford Foundation, SK Day Chair. And since 2003, he was for three times our SK Day Chair professor. And what a history he made during that time. And he continued to that, as he always said, he was former SKD chair professor of the Institute of Social Sciences. The kind of work, the kind of dedication and kind of inspiration he gave for all others is we will never forget. And the kind of lectures he gave, the papers, and the participation, it contributed immensely to the growth and development of our thinking process. And many, many scholars from India and abroad were associated with him at that time. I want to mention here two works they did, which were very, very important, but still he could not allow us to publish. He was making it more and more perfect and perfect and perfect. That is his idea. Anyway, one was a study of the Panchayat elections in West Bengal and also in Punjab. And the script is ready, but he said, George, let us wait, then let us do this and that. And another one was a study of Nandigram, that historic events of 2008, 2009. And that paper we corrected and kept everything. And he said, George, we will publish it. We will publish it. I think we have to now anyway publish it. The manuscript is there. And I am very touched by his human approach. He used to come, he loved to come to Kerala. And once when he was in Trivandrum, along with me, he said, George, where is the village where you were born and where is your ancestors? I said, it is very far away. Come, let us go there. I think it was on a car or a bus. We went all the way to our village. And he was looking around, such an anthropological approach and a human touch. I will never forget with Partha. And he will be fondly remembered by all of us in the ISS family and for years to come. And we will be organizing another event to pay our tribute to Partha. Thank you.
He and I forged a very close bond during the years that he was the president of the Indian Sociological Society. I remember he always used to call me RK, so which gives a special identity. Nobody else does that. I worked with him very closely. I felt he was a true gentleman, a true scholar, as has been pointed out. He was extremely erudite, as we all know, but with what I would say, with a twinkling sense of humor. And he was very gentle, very kind, which I saw, we traveled together a lot. We went to Sri Lanka, we went to the different Indian Sociological Society conferences together. But way back, before I met him in person, I had reviewed his excellent book, Methodology in Social Research, but it impressed me with the precision of his thought and writing. And maybe, that's why it took long to publish. I remember, when we organized these South Asia conferences, our idea was that, the sociologists who are living and teaching and writing in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Bhutan, in Sri Lanka. And we had this very strong desire to strengthen the bond, strengthen the common issues which were common to all these South Asian countries, and exchange our thoughts and ideas. What is, I don't know, many people may know, may not know, that we nearly succeeded in giving shape to a South Asia Sociology Association. He went, to the point where we had a constitution ready. We had Professor Siri Hettige from Sri Lanka. We had colleagues from Bangladesh. And I really hope, that some some younger sociologists will take this forward, and these ideas of forging these closer bonds between these South Asian countries. He used to ring me up and we would chat. We used to meet in the ISS cafeteria, which Professor George Matthew always was, kept open for us. We used to get lovely lunches with him. As Professor Kaviraj said, those are the times in which, your ideas fructify and you exchange without straight-jacketed conference type of things. I remember that, when we did these South Asia conferences, we had to get permissions from the Ministry of External Affairs, MHRD, Home. He and I would go together in his car and meet various officials and try to convince them to let people from Pakistan and let people from other countries come. I remember this young woman who came from Bhutan and wrote a paper for us. And, Bhutan hadn't been on the radar of sociology in the same way. That period was so fulfilling for me. I hope it was for him as well. But as others have said, he also forged personal relationships. So I enjoyed the great food at Rahul's, home with his mother, his grandmother taking charge of the extensive meal that would be prepared of Bengali food, which was absolutely gorgeous. I can still remember it to this day. We would pour over our, whatever we wrote for the Sociological Society conferences. I think he started the Lifetime Achievement Award, and we gave to Professor Madan and various other people. It was an honor to have known him, to have been working with him. I feel sad that very recently I hadn't spoken with him. And I really, I think that regret will be there that I hadn't talked to Deepa, talked to others. So there's, I will not say much more. We have all known him as a scholar. Most of us have known him as a person. I think he was an epitome of moral uprightness without being moralistic. May his soul rest in peace. I feel sad that, he could have lived many more years, but I think everything that he was as a person, an academic, a scholar, field worker, those will live in our hearts and memories forever.
My intellectual inclination towards Professor Partha Mukherjee began when I read his long book chapter on Naxalbari movement and the peasant revolt in North Bengal in M.S.A. Rao edited book. Thereafter, I started following and collecting his writings and looked for opportunities for interaction and association. Professor Mukherjee is one of the few sociologists who, in fact, broadened the horizon of sociological research in India. And his writings, along with few others, marked the beginning of a new era in Indian sociology on the study of social conflicts and social movements. Similarly, his contribution to methodology in social sciences is noteworthy. While acknowledging the importance of qualitative and micro village studies, he was insisting on macro quantitative analysis with the application of statistical tools. He was of the opinion that in order to contribute to larger development discourse and to have an impact on policy making, we need to go for larger studies. He was indeed an advocate of methodological pluralism. In his view, the dynamics of social change and development in a country like India that generate conflict and contradictions is infinitely more complex and hence incomparably more difficult to research. He was strongly for the universalization of sociology, that too only through indigenization. Professor Mukherjee was quite critical of sociological research in India, including his own writings. He said that we have no clear idea to what extent economic development are impacting on the society and with what consequences and for whom. We need to study how the development efforts by the state and the role of the increasingly globalized market are impacting on society with what consequences and for whom. He felt that if there is one area in which the role of sociologists is of most urgent necessity, it is the study of social mobility on macro scale. We work together for some time to develop a research proposal on social mobility, which we presented at the South Asia workshop in 2005. Started working for his pending paper on nation states and nation building. He said, my argument was that Indian nation states has steadily evolved through a continuous zigzag process of differentiation and integration.
Yes.
When I asked, does a crystallized nation state bring an end to the conflict and contradictions? His answer was that maturing of a crystallized nation state does not signal their end.
Right.
Within a few days, he sent the paper for my comments and I told him that I would need 3 weeks of time. After 3 weeks, I sent my comments by email, but did not receive any response. Usually, he was very prompt in response. I was about to call him to know his response to my comments, but meanwhile, I got the message that he's no more. Professor Mukherji's passing away truly left behind a void in the study area of development studies and a scholarly vision. I lost one of my great academic mentors. Between these 2 evenings, spanning over 2 decades, I have learned a lot from him, and his frank critical comments and interest in my research had a tremendous impact on my career, and I shall miss him greatly.
मेरे लिए तो शब्द बहुत कम है, मैं नहीं जानता हूँ किसी शब्द में मैं पार्थोदा को आज नमन करूं एवं याद करूं। पार्थोदा के साथ मेरा संबंध जो है लास्ट 3 डिकेड्स की संबंध है, बोथ एट एकेडमिक लेवल एज वेल एज सोशल लेवल में। और उनकी लेख में, उनकी भाषण में आप देखेंगे गांधी जी का कितनी प्रभाव उनकी व्यक्तिमत्व के ऊपर था, ये रिफ्लेक्शन करता है। जब मैं नांदेड़ विश्वविद्यालय में एक गांव के अंदर स्थापित हुआ विश्वविद्यालय में कार्यरत था, मैं एक नेशनल सेमिनार कर रहा था, वहां आयोजित किया था, उसमें पार्थोदा को चीफ गेस्ट के रूप में बुलाया था। तो आए और जब वो परिवेश देखे मेरे को बोले, विष्णु तुम तो एक महान काम यहाँ कर रहे हैं, आदिवासी विद्यार्थी को तुम पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट डिग्री की शिक्षा दे रहे हैं, मेट्रोपॉलिटन जगह में शिक्षा देना, यूनिवर्सिटी में शिक्षा देना बहुत इजी है। ऑल इंडिया सोशियोलॉजिकल कॉन्फ्रेंस में प्रेसिडेंशियल एड्रेस में उनका मुख्य रूप में इनके ऊपर भार था कि सोशियोलॉजी अगर भारत में डेवलप होगा तो हमको डेफिनेटली गांव की दिशा में जाना पड़ेगा, मोफेसिल स्टूडेंट को इसके अंदर में शामिल करना पड़ेगा। मैं जब संबलपुर यूनिवर्सिटी में कुलपति महोदय को लेटर मिला अपॉइंटमेंट के बारे में, आज वाइस चांसलर, और मैं वहां 3 साल तक काम किया। उसी दरमियान मैं दादा को बुलाया था संबलपुर यूनिवर्सिटी को फाउंडेशन डे सेलिब्रेशन के लिए, और वो हायर एजुकेशन इन इंडिया के ऊपर भाषण दे रहे थे। मेरे दादा के साथ लास्ट संपर्क था सितंबर महीने में। मैं दादा को टेलीफोन जस्ट किया, मेरे दादा आपके आशीर्वाद से मेरा ये फेलोशिप सिलेक्शन हुआ है, मैं सोच रहा हूँ ज्वाइन करने के लिए। दिस वाज माय लास्ट इंटरेक्शन विद दादा। 13 तारीख की रात को मेरे पास व्हाट्सएप मैसेज आया कि दादा इज नो मोर। मैं विश्वास नहीं कर पाया कि दादा हमारे बीच में नहीं रहे। उनको ट्रिब्यूट पे कर रहा हूँ, और दीदी को और राहुल को, उनके परिवार को भगवान के पास प्रार्थना करता हूँ कि उनको ताकत दे, ये डिफिकल्ट घड़ी को कैसे पास करे और समर्थ दे ये सिचुएशन को सहन करने के लिए। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
As most of you informed us, my relation was also of nearly half a century. I was his first student for MPhil at JNU, and I had very intimate relationship of teacher and student for 5 semesters. And from there, it grew into more like a brotherly bonding, where we became each other's consultants. He was a very pessimistic Gandhian, and he was a very passionate sociologist. Today, when you all were talking about him, my mind started calculating, my God, this man gave nearly 55 years of his active intellectual life in building sociology in India. We are hardly 100 years old discipline in which 70s was the turning point for sociology in India. And he was one of the pioneers in partnership with people like Professor Uman, Professor Yogen Singh, and of course, with the patronage of Professor Ramkrishna Mukherjee. And he was a symbol of maturity, mindfulness, moderation, and of course, morality. I saw him in many roles, and I must say that he was a great achiever in his personal family life. In whole GNU system, it was a model joint family because nothing was possible in his life without, at one end, his father and mother, and at another end, children of Indranath Mukherjee and his own two sons, Suman and Rahul. They'll move together. In classroom, he'll maintain a very distinction between his role as a teacher, motivator, moderator, and outside the classroom as a concerned Indian citizen. I must inform all of you that it was his very personal engagement as a concerned sociologist which made him survive all the trials and tribulations. His life was not a cakewalk. He did not have a bed of roses like many of his contemporaries. But in any of the controversies, whether it was his opportunity to move forward academically or to have a place of honor and dignity as leader of our professional bodies or as academic symbol and representative in various institutions of significance, he never lost his cool, he never lost his moderation. He was a very mature mind. He was the only sociologist of substance who tried to put his time in promoting South Asian networking of sociologists. He was not very arrogant Indian. At the same time, he was very patriotic. So his engagement was for promoting indigenous sociology on scientific basis. He was a very self-effacing person. I had seen him. His role was very intimate with Jayaprakash Narayan. But when emergency was over and everybody was trying to pull levers of power, Partha was coolly away from the whole system of Gandhi Peace Foundation and JP's paraphernalia. He never asked for any favor. Later on, he also had many other opportunities, but he was an arrogant academician. He was very confident about his power of knowledge and glory and glamour of his scholarship. And that was making him our role model. I'm very happy that Rahul was able to put together all of you, and so many of you have come rallying in memory of Professor Partha Mukherjee. I had seen him as president of Indian Sociological Society. What a grace. I saw him performing in South Asia, in South African World Congress. And he was sitting next to Professor Immanuel Wallerstein. Both were people of substance, concerned intellectuals, but his modesty was overwhelming with even Professor Wallerstein. And he was a man who had many missions. So like a great teacher, he has opened many windows and doors for all of us to see the light and follow the path. Thank you so much.
I first met Professor Partha Mukherjee in 1986 at the World Congress. I found him to be a very enthusiastic academic and also energetic, leader, of some sort. But unfortunately, our paths never, crossed until 2004, when he became the president of the Indian Sociological Society, and I was the managing editor of the Sociological Bulletin. He used to call me NJ. Is not, the initials, of my name, N and J. He would combine it, make it an acronym, and there was some affection, went with it. He treated me, as a very close, friend. From 2004 until mid-January, when I called him, spoke to him the last, when he was not all that well, in taking the call. I thought, that I don't know whether I would go to Delhi under these circumstances, but I would call him again. But the next time, I got the message was that he was no more. Now, I would like to mention two, of the things with which I was closely associated with him. One was the South Asian workshop, which was held at Surajkund, Haryana. Subsequently, when a course of special lectures in memory of Professor Ramakrishna Mukherjee was organized, he again involved me, say, in that. We co-edited, say, a volume to which a reference has been, say, made already. Now, while working with him, he was the president of the society. I was the managing editor. He never interfered, say, with my work. He was always encouraging, always constructive, say, in his suggestion. He had a knack, say, of putting across things without sounding, say, offensive. I think that is a very remarkable, say, quality in a senior colleague. He always valued suggestions, and he appreciated, say, that. And in fact, if you look at, see, the footnotes that he wrote by way of acknowledgement, he always made it a point to acknowledge whatever help, see, he had received. I would like to emphasize two things which have personally influenced me. One is his emphasis on not following any doctrine. He said, be familiar with all theories, all, see, approaches, but committing oneself to any ism, say, carries a great danger, against which, say, he had cautioned us. The second thing, which, say, influenced me very much, his critique of the Western hegemony of Indian social sciences. And he always put forward the idea of indigenization, say, of sociology, social sciences, say, in India. So, as Mohanty mentioned, say, earlier, he cautioned, say, against parochialism, advocated indigenization to reach universality. I think that is something which is remarkable about his way of thinking about, see, the subject. It was Partha who emphasized the importance of discussing the region or the state in which a conference is held. One special, see, symposium must be devoted, see, to that. And it was during his presidency that Sociological Bulletin became a triannual. Till then, we used to publish only 2 issues. And with his, see, presidency, we started publishing 3 issues. And I also remember the encouragement, help, and the understanding that he had in the digitization project when we digitized the first 55 volumes in 1 CD. In his passing away, I have lost a warm friend and a well-wisher. I would like, you see, to conclude by conveying my heartfelt condolences to his family and all his friends who were part of, you see, the larger family that he had in the profession.
As you know, it was late evening, February 30, when I received a grief-stricken call from my friend that Professor Partha Mukherjee, an eminent social scientist, left for heavenly abode. Thus lost one of my great mentor, affectionate friend, and fatherly figure. May the blessings of Almighty be upon him and forbearance to the bereaved family. As you know, death is inevitable as ordained in the Holy Quran. I would like to quote here that we belong to him and we shall have to return. As we are lost in him, an outstanding statesman, a man of great intellect and a big heart, who to the last hour of his life gave all his energy to the cause of Indian society and sociology. And in this hour of grief and sorrow, we share our thoughts to honor Professor Partha Mukherjee, the illustrious son of sociology. Let me share that the great minds never die, as he's lied to me and my family, as he has been so inspiring, caring, and had enduring influence on my person, as his affectionate attitude and actions will live on forever. Let me resolve to follow his cherished values of integrity and humanism. That would be a great homage, Kharaj Aqidat, to him. though he was not in a good state of mind and health. But despite of this fact, I acknowledge that until his last breath, he was so conscious of his concern for happenings around that he responded to my republic greetings, which reads as under, "It did not turn out to be that happy. Let us wish this is the first and last such thing will happen. Long live our republic." Let me conclude that that Professor Partha Mukherjee was an institution, that he is not with us now, but the flame of his contributions will continue to burn brilliantly as he was a flame for Indian sociology. May God bless him eternal peace and strength to bear his departure for heavenly abode. Thank you.
पार्थदा को श्रद्धांजलि देना ये दिल में शूल उठने वाली बात है, ये अनसेटल करने वाली बात है, जिनमें ये खोज की आंतरिक क्वेस्ट थी कि हमें हिंदुस्तान की मिजरी के ट्रूथ को देखना है। और ये मैंने पार्थदा में देखा कि एक व्यक्ति के रूप में, एक एकेडमिक के रूप में, इनमें हिंदुस्तान की मिजरी, यहाँ के गरीब सताए हुए लोगों की मिजरी को उसके अल्टीमेट ट्रूथ में देखने की क्वेस्ट थी। मेरा रिश्ता उनसे बिहार आंदोलन के समय का था, तो पार्थदा को मैंने वहां आते जाते देखा। उसके बाद जो भी हमारी अपनी जो क्वेस्ट चली स्वराज पीठ की, कि रेडिकल्स में काम करना, माओवादियों में काम करना, इनको अहिंसा की तरफ लाना, उनको न्याय से बेदखल किए बिना अहिंसा की तरफ लाना, ये जम्मू बांका उस इलाके में कश्मीर के रेडिकल्स लोगों के बीच में जो काम किया, उसमें पार्थदा की लगातार इतनी गहरी दिलचस्पी रही और उसमें हम लोगों का साथ घनिष्ठ से घनिष्ठ होता गया। पार्थदा का जाना ये तो उम्मीद ही नहीं थी। उम्मीद तो ये करते थे कि उनसे फिर से कब मिलेंगे, ये कोरोना वायरस, ये कोविड जाए तो कब उनसे मुलाकात होगी। मेरी आखिरी मुलाकात उससे ठीक पहले उनके घर में दीपा जी और उनसे हुई थी। उस समय कुछ हमारी चर्चा उसी पर चली। वो खोज रहे थे कि गांधी जी और जिन्ना के बीच के रिश्ता में क्या है, लेकिन फिर कहा था कि इस पे मैं और ज्यादा बात करना चाहता हूँ, वो रह गई। लेकिन हमेशा कहा कि राजीव, मुझे जाना है उन इलाकों में जहां पर तुम लोगों ने बंदूक वाले लोगों से बंदूक छुड़वाई है। उनकी दिलचस्पी केवल उसमें रिसर्च करने की नहीं, लेकिन बदलाव के सही स्वरूप को समझने की है कि इसमें से क्या पद्धतियां निकल रही है। इसलिए पार्थदा की कीमत ज्यादा है कि इस देश की धुरी में जो एकमात्र कोई वैल्यू, मूल्य निष्ठा है तो अहिंसा और सत्य की है। ये पार्थदा का जाना वो एक ऐसे व्यक्ति का जाना है। व्यक्तिगत रूप से वो परिवार से भी ज्यादा थे। इतना स्नेह, इतना प्यार देना, कभी अपना स्वार्थ या अपना काम निकालने की उनकी नजर में कभी आता ही नहीं किसी के रिश्ते में। उनको हमेशा ये रहता है कि इसको मैं कैसे, मेरे पास जो कुछ है उससे मैं सामने वाले की कैसे मदद करूं, उसकी कैसे सहायता करूं, उसको कैसे लगे कि मैं तुम्हारे साथ हूं, तुम्हारे सहकार में हूं। कंपैशन, प्यार, ये इनके वो गुण थे कि जिस गुण से जुड़ने के बाद आदमी उनका अपना हो जाता था। इसलिए पार्थदा को जाना और पार्थदा को इस प्रकार से श्रद्धांजलि देना बहुत ही कष्ट हो रहा है। मैं आप सब लोगों को प्रणाम करता हूँ।
We were two brothers and we were brought up during since our infancy in Patna. We had our education up to the college level, university level in Patna. He had several mentors. The one that was mentioned was his overall linkage and appeal for the Gandhian philosophy, and following that, his close interaction with
Sri Jaiprakash Narayan. That was the second one. And third, his academic guru, whom he met very frequently, Ramakrishna Mukherjee. And the fourth one, his spiritual guru, Swami Vishuddhanandaji of Ramakrishna Mission, influenced his entire future research and what he did in future, and the personality that he was a composite culmination of all these three efforts, three impacts that had on his living and on his future research. After his master's in sociology, he wanted to work at the grassroots level and got deeply involved in village studies, particularly Ramdan and Bhudan movements. One would wonder if the two of us could have interacted academically, but my discipline was economics and his was sociology. Sociology was an emerging social science, and the economics was at that time also much developed. But on one occasion, when he wanted to work out the relevance of social sciences, the concepts and the methodologies of the Western countries to that of the developing ones, that is to find out, answer the question whether the indigeneity of the West has relevance for the rest. In that context, I found that I could contribute in that volume which has been mentioned, where I studied the relevance of farmers' rights in the context of the globalization. The other thing that I would like to mention is that it is not very much known that Professor Mukherjee, my Dada, had a disease that was hereditary. During his youthful days, he was in the best of health. To keep himself fit, would do yoga, asanas, pranayam every morning meticulously, 1.5 hours, followed by prayers. That is how started the day. So there was not much work he could do during daytime, and his day started at night 9 p.m. after dinner. So nobody knows that this was a great pressure on which and he would go to villages when he was not well. He was not supposed to go in that condition. Water was not good, food was not available, but he would still go, and we were very concerned that he would make the visit. He told me once that if you pray for me, don't pray for my survival. You pray to him to say that he do best, that the Almighty should do what is best for him. Right. And that is what was happened, because if he had lived, he would have lived a crippled life. Okay. And that would probably not have been. Now, the hope is that the tradition that he has left behind, I am very confident, is already been taken up by Rahul, because he's moving like his father, is moving at the grassroots level and doing his research. And this is the hope that I have, that he will carry on the research left behind by my Dada. I think this is all that I can say right now.
They say that brevity is the soul of wit. It doesn't take away anything. So I'm also sitting with my mother. So we are sort of together in this. From what I have heard so far, it's very clear that it's a very hard task to follow, because here was a man who would easily have gone to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and come back with a PhD, who taught at the Patna University for many years. I know the struggles he had at the Delhi School of Economics in those days, when his work was not considered anthropological enough. And then throughout, I think he treaded a path which was not often taken. Whenever I have gotten close to any political dispensation, he has warned me. He has said that don't ever go very close to a political dispensation because it will take away from your scholarship. So I'm reminded of what Anand Bhai said, the arrogance of scholarship, that we should be living in a world where we can observe. Of course, we must participate, and we will make mistakes, but we should not be driven by criteria that are not scholarly. But before I say a couple of words about him, I just wanted to sort of read out a letter that, my dearest teacher at Columbia University wrote about him. Dear Rahul, I remember quite vividly meeting your father in my Columbia office many years ago. He struck me as a man of very deep insight, wisdom, and great self-possession. He must have been a powerful role model for you and a guiding force for many generations of his own students. Now, Jack had only met him once in his office. I am imagining that ceremony for him will be quite the event. My father was a school principal who was active in civic affairs, and people from his past associations turned up from all over at his memorial event. Their reminiscences about his impact on their lives bowled me over. This email came to me before I traveled. I think it must have been quickly, maybe when I was taking a flight, travel safe. So what Jack was telling me in this email is something that I have already realized in this meeting, that the relationship that I have and had with my father was a very intimate one. I don't think many children have that kind of privilege. I was kind of talking to him regularly till the very end. But I do realize that there is so much that I did not know about his persona. And the point that Jack makes, that he realized when he was at his father's memorial event, that there is a generation of people who have been influenced. He was not just a father, he was father to many, many scholarly individuals. And that, I think, as a teacher, is something that we carry very dear. Of course, if we are able to influence our children in the same way that he had, that would be, a great blessing. Another message that Dr. Manmohan Singh sent recently was, Dear Professor Mukherjee, I have learned with profound sorrow about the passing away of your beloved father, Professor Partha Mukherjee. I know that Professor Mukherjee was active in his scholarly way till the very end, thinking deeply about the substantial issues that confront us. Among the sociologists, Professor Partha Mukherjee stood apart. And then, of course, there is a long, and then he expresses his. If there is anything that I have learned from him, and over time, after being fairly rebellious, is the importance of empirical groundedness. So, for example, when I used to talk to my fellow political scientists, they used to laugh at me. Oh, you're going to go to a village to figure out what's going on? I had a lot of challenge. Of course, I had very good colleagues at the Center for Political Studies. When I took a bunch of students on exciting fieldwork, of course, Zoya is in the audience, and I must say that she was one of my big supporters at that time. But it was not easy to carry out that fieldwork in the context of the way in which methodology was being taught at that time. And I was so inspired to take the students for fieldwork, and all of us learned so much that I actually became a very popular teacher. in the few years that I was at the Center for Political Studies. The second is methodology, and I really don't need to say much about this because it has been largely covered. But I want to say that, I think what is interesting about him was I think a kind of his ability to stand detached from what sells, what can easily get you a job, what can easily get you published in a leading journal. And that struggle I also had. I got a lot of rejects from the leading journals in the field before I got my first paper published in the Journal of Asian Studies. And it's not like we were trying to say that we don't want to learn from the West. Of course, I now hold a prestigious chair in a Western university, and I have learned from my mentors in the West. But this ability to be grounded, to do your field work, to be able to look at reality from where it should be seen, however imperfectly, is something that was kind of injected into our veins. So that when I came for my job talk at Heidelberg, my dear friend, the chair of anthropology, Bo Sachs, he said, "Rahul, it seems you really went to the village and you know what was going on." I said, "Yeah, I actually went to the village, and I didn't stay in the village for 6 months like you. I probably spent a day in that village, but whatever I'm talking about is from what I know." And that just bowled him over. He came to my lunch meeting and he said, "Rahul, you're the guy we must get. You actually are a political scientist who knows what's going on inside a village." The third is the idea of India. And I think this is a very, very important point because we are also circulating, I think Mr. Haldar is circulating the most recent Netaji Subhash Bose lecture, and he's actually been thinking about it for a very long period of time. And I think like him, that we have to be able to think on our own feet as to who we are. And the problem really is that we are not thinking on our own feet. And I think Professor Kaviraj has been doing some very erudite work on this. He has been sending, and he has, of course, the skills because he knows Sanskrit. But this was a very, very important point, and the kinds of things he was talking and saying about the Indian nation, building it on a civilizational platform, was something not easily acceptable in either mainstream here or mainstream there. Of course, it was Gandhian. So I think there is a lot of inspiration to be taken from him to be able to think boldly about this idea of the nation, which is the only idea of the nation that can actually sustain India as a civilization, as well as a nation, but not in the same sense of a German nation. And I think his idea of India was deeply influenced both by Vivekananda and Gandhi. Today, we've reached a stage where people think that Vivekananda was a narrow-minded Hindu nationalist. And even to argue otherwise would think that it is kind of counterintuitive. So we have actually gotten so deeply imprisoned in our categories and in all of the things that have become so fashionable in the academia that we can easily go down a path which can be called secular but not following the Indian tradition, which can be called materialistic secular but not following at least a very important strand in the Indian tradition. And living in Germany, I sometimes think that if we were able to interpret the Indian tradition, it would not only be good for India, it would even be good for Germany. Countries all over the world face this problem, and India has solutions to this problem. Professor Kaviraj once told me, in an intimate discussion at his residence that, Rahul, the problem is that Sanskrit scholars in India have access to the materials, And there are very few people like us who have that kind of knowledge of that language. And Sanskrit scholars in the West have a lot of very interesting things to say, but they don't have the access to those materials, which would actually help them think more deeply about Indian civilization. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to persuade him to come and visit us in Heidelberg and enlighten us more along those lines. Finally, I think the issue of humility and concern are very important. I can tell you that this Netaji Subhash Bose memorial lecture that he delivered is something he shared with me, on which I wrote 2 pages. And after reading those 2 pages, he said, Rahul, this is excellent. I would like to do everything that you have said, but I probably won't have the energy to do it. When I shared these comments with a colleague of mine, whose father also happens to be a scholar, he said, how lucky you are to have a father who is so sensitive to all your critical comments and who really is sort of filled with joy that he has received these comments on his paper. I mean, of course, one can go on and on. There are many more examples that I can take. And finally, the question of concern, which has been mentioned. I don't need to belabor that point. His concern for his family, for his students, and for society at large. And this was expressed very lightly. I think the one lesson that we can all learn from him is that he appeared to all of us as a very simple person who could even be faulted in many ways. But in his departure, we realize, what a colossus we have lost. He was happy because of his association with the Policy Perspectives Foundation. And the Policy Perspective Foundation, through him, is an organization with which I also developed a relationship. There was a lecture organized by me. There was a very good friend of mine whom we lost, Dr. Mikhail Liebig, who was doing outstanding work on Kautilya. So it's really not a time to thank in the sense that it's the end of a relationship, but a time to thank in the sense that the relationship will persist. And of course, Manika has enlightened us with her feelings. So we know that the same spirit that Professor Mukherjee carried with respect to his colleagues, his students, and his junior colleagues continued till the very end, as was evident in this heartwarming and moving message that Manika had for Professor Mukherjee. I'm sure his research associates and assistants at the Institute of Social Sciences would also make similar lectures if they were called upon to do so. Then one must also thank the Institute of Social Sciences, Dr. George Matthew, who equally much called him his Guruji or Gurudev. And of course, my former senior colleague, who now holds the chair that my father held, Professor Balveer Arora. No sooner had he received the email that promptly came the reply that we must do this. And I could see that in response to that reply, there was so much enthusiasm that Professor Mukherjee, that Professor Arora has taken up the responsibility to chair. Apart from the Institute and the chairs, I would like to thank all the speakers, because some of the speakers are not so well known to me in person, but since I was very closely associated with him throughout his life, you would be surprised how much I knew about you all. So, for example, with regard to Professor Uman, of course, he has already mentioned that we were neighbors, and Professor Kaviraj, he's seen me grow as the son of a friend, and then as a student. There were only 2 classes that I attended at the Center for Political Studies, and one was his class. And then, of course, I have always been wondering what he has been thinking about my erratic progress. But he's always kind of been very, very warm and nice and reassuring, to the extent that I thought that he was probably being more generous than he should be. But his confidence and reassurance have certainly produced good results. Professor Atul Sharma, who was clearly my father's best friend at the Indian Statistical Institute. That's a very deep relationship. And some of that depth was reflected. He is, after my father, one of those very guardian-like figures who has that kind of a place in my family's mind's eye. Dr. George Matthew, who has expressed himself, who's numerous times mentioned to me how deeply he has felt the loss of my father. Professor Ravinder Kaur, whom I have called Didi for many, many years, and I do not even want to tell you why I call her Didi, because whenever there's been a problem and I have told her that it needs to be resolved, she's been a knight in shining armor, and she pretends as if she's done nothing for us. Professor Mohanty is somebody I have not met in the past, but I can tell you that he was so fond of you and he was so fond of your scholarship that I think he will be very happy that we have connected today. There are many, many things he has told me about you. Professor Vishnu Barik of Sambalpur University. Once again, this is the first time I have met him, but the many, many wonderful exchanges about him and how he went to Sambalpur and how the excellent work is being done in Sambalpur were also expressed to me with great warmth and affection. Similarly, Professor Jairam, who he had had a long and very, very nice association with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. The director of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences couldn't make it today, but she's written wonderful letters. She's expressed all kinds of help. And that was a wonderful association he had with the Institute. And I'm so delighted that it continued. Sometimes he would even mention to me that perhaps I should have taken another 3 years of directorship and stayed on. Towards the end, he did mention to me once that, Rahul, I think I made a mistake. I should have stayed for another 3 years. And he could easily have, that resignation letter example that he had given to Professor Vishnu Barik was always there for his own life. The letter of resignation would be there if there was to be a compromise. Sri Rajiv Vora has expressed himself as expected. I must tell you that since he's not here, that when I posted on Facebook, he wrote back to me saying, Rahul, can you give me your mobile? I had heard from a group of Kashmiri scholars that Partha is not there, but I was not prepared to believe it. Is this true that he's not there? How can it be? And then he called me and he cried for 1 whole hour. Said, Rahul, this is not possible. How can it happen? So the way in which he touched the hearts of these people, the genuine people. I remember him telling me about how he was working with Gandhians in Kashmir to find a non-violent way of making Kashmiris feel that they are a part of this great civilization. And Kashmiris were actually responding to that approach. With regard to Professor Anand Kumar, I have very little to say because one must also say that he was quite a charismatic leader in those days when I was not even in my teens. And I used to go to learn Hindi from his sister, who I was very fond of. So I had the rare privilege of going to Godavari hostel in those days when I was very young. And of course, he went away to Chicago. So I didn't see him for a long time. But he was the first non-SFI president of the Students' Union of JNU. And I remember that election because, you know, our house was quite a place, even during the emergency, some of which was kind of referred to in the passing by Professor Kabiraj. My mother used to say that if you were not a JNU professor, you would have certainly been in prison. So Professor Mr. Haldar would have had another way of knowing Professor Mukherjee from that perspective. So I think all of you, heartfelt thanks, and I'm sure the relationship continues. And everyone who has attended this meeting, I can see that there is one person who wants to say something. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to all.
I thank all the guests who have come here on our invitation and made this occasion very memorable by sharing their own heartfelt tributes. There has been an outpouring of tributes, as you could see. I wanted to have two small announcements. One is that the book, in book form, the lecture addressed by Professor Partha Muherji would be sent to the email address of all the participants today, and then later in consultation with Rahul will decide how to formally publish it. Second is that PPF has decided to institute an annual lecture in the memory of late Professor P.N. Muherji. The subject generally would be social and social movements, social issues and social movements. But in that, I understand that I would be reverting back to many of you in the coming years to help us out with the matter. But thanks once again from my side, from the members of the Policy Perspectives Foundation, and we once again convey our heartfelt condolences to the family on this sad occasion. Thank you.
Thank you.